You are watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Horrifying discoveries continue to be made in Syria since the overthrow of President Assad at the weekend. They include the place where hundreds of people are said to have been buried following a chemical attack in 2013. Serious questions are being asked tonight about the child protection system in the UK following the Sarah Sharif case. A social worker has told Sky News that the system of care for children is broken. The head of NATO, Mark Rutte, has claimed Russia is preparing for a long-term confrontation with Ukraine and the West. Meanwhile, Donald Trump said he disagrees with Joe Biden's policy of allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles against Russia. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the political commentator Tim Montgomery and the Belfast Telegraph columnist Alison Morris. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Express leads with Sir Keir Starmer calling for questions to be answered over why more wasn't done to protect 10-year-old Sarah Sharif, whose father and stepmother were found guilty of her murder yesterday. The Eye carries warnings from NATO's new Secretary-General that Europe must put itself in a wartime mindset. The paper also says that Sir Keir Starmer and Donald Trump may be headed for a showdown over Britain's defence spending. The Financial Times reports that European NATO members are discussing the possibility of raising their defence spending targets to 3% of their GDP. The Sun claims that a party for Buckingham Palace staff at a bar nearby spiralled out of control after glasses were hurled and punches thrown. The palace says it is aware of the incident and is investigating. The Guardian reports that jury trials could be abandoned for some criminal cases in England and Wales as part of a radical overhaul after Crown Court's backlog hit a record high. The Metro questions why the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, felt the need to share her opinion that lunch is for wimps and sandwiches aren't real food. The paper also questions why the Prime Minister felt the need to respond. While the Star asks whether they're both a sarnie short of a picnic. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we're joined tonight by Tim Montgomery and Alison Morris. And I'm going to ask you to do the majority of the talking because my voice is failing me, as you can hear.
That's quite a dangerous invitation you've given us.
OK, maybe you, Alison. Right, well, let's start with the Times front page and this awful story now reflecting on child services in the UK and the job that they do and the failings that they come up against time and time again. Tim?
Look, I hesitate to judge social workers because you look at the burnout rate, in this profession, it's some of the worst. I can't look at these pictures without wanting to look away. I'm afraid sometimes the stories I want to avoid, and I don't feel proud of myself for it, but this is a story I want to avoid. This is a profession I would want to avoid, to have to confront what the worst of humanity often is very difficult. Having said all that, and I don't mean to diminish what I've just said, I mean it absolutely, there are times when you just think, how many more times do we have to go through the same sort of story where we hear yet again that, the professional services that are meant to protect some of the most vulnerable children in our country, they've been let down again. And this wasn't a case of a few isolated warnings. This were 15 warnings that, through the teachers, through school, through neighbours, the authorities had. And I'm afraid, are we going to have another inquiry which takes years and nothing changes? I don't know what we do about it, but this particular family, Sarah Sharif was under watch even before she was born because the family had a history of, coming into contact with social services. So, honestly, I would tear my hair out if I had very much of it left. The whole idea of this I don't know what we do anymore. Is it about resourcing of this profession? Is it about the kind of level of qualification, training? But the Victoria Climbier inquiry, we've been down this road so many times. I don't know what the answer is anymore.
Alison, it is fair to say, though, that we do only hear about the failings of social services when it occurs. We don't hear all of the success stories when it actually works. So we kind of perhaps blow it out of proportion.
I think in this case, the system should have worked and didn't, because the warnings were there. We do know that there are children who fall through the net, who maybe don't even come to the attention of social services until something awful happens to them. But that's not what happened here. And also there are the warning signs were there. Family court judge continually handed this child back to these people despite the fact that there was warnings about their care. This is something else. As journalists, we can report on the courts. Courts have to be open. Justice has to be open. The family courts are closed, and we know that that's for the protection of children, but it also means that questions and judgments that are being made in those courts aren't open to scrutiny. And I think that that's something that this case, if the Prime Minister does say questions need to be asked and lessons need to be learned, and that phrase, actually, lessons need to be learned, infuriates me, because how many children have to die before lessons actually are learned and something is put in place.
But you mentioned the courts, and the family courts would have made decisions, but they presumably would have had the background of the parents. So it just doesn't add up that they would have made those decisions knowing the backstory.
And a lot of cases, those decisions were made because there is the family court seems to, in many cases, think that a child should always be with the parents unless it's a very last resort. The presumption is a child is better with its own parents, and sometimes a child is just not better with their own parents. They would be better in the care system, as complicated as that is.
Social workers are often attacked
also,
for when they, break up a family, aren't they?
Yeah.
So
also
sometimes
this child was,
you when the head you lose tells you.
Yeah, this child was apparently homeschooled. She wasn't homeschooled. She was being abused in a home and wasn't going to school. School teachers are often the first line of defence for abused children. They'll notice a withdrawn child, they'll notice a dirty child, they'll notice a hungry child, they'll notice a child with bruises on them.
But
any child who is on the at-risk register should not be allowed to be homeschooled. I don't even understand. I mean, homeschooling is something that should be very strictly monitored.
100%.
But if a child is at all on the at-risk register, if they're under the attention of social services, well, then homeschooling should be completely taken off the table, because a lot of times, and we've seen that during lockdown, there were children who were murdered during lockdown, and we know those awful cases because those children weren't going to school, no one was seeing them. Teachers have a duty to red flag any child they're concerned about. And there were so many missed opportunities to save this little girl, prevent her having the atrocious death that she had. And I understand when you're saying you have to look away, because the details of it are so horrific. It's probably one of the worst cases of abuse that I have read. And when I see pictures of her poor wee face, and thinking that somebody should have saved her, somebody should have stepped in, and they didn't.
And it's the detail of the horrible abuse, but there's just like little character reports as well, that teachers noticed that when she was with or close to her dad, she flinched. The very fact that being close to her dad, she was frightened. You would have expected an expert eye to have
or stood facing a wall. There were so many signs that this wee thing was
absolutely frightened.
Yeah, terrified.
And the fact that we as a society weren't there
and that
for
nobody
her in the way
went.
that we
I would
should have
just
been.
that nobody saved her.
But what's worrying is that the failings all the way down the line. I mean, it's not just the school. It's not just the social workers. I mean, the whole gamut of those involved in her life. We don't know about GPs. You know.
But not only are they failings, every one of those failings is an opportunity. Every one of those reports was an opportunity for someone to step in and say, I'm removing this child from your care to keep her safe. And had that been done, she would be alive today. And instead, this awful case, and I will look forward to see what sentence that is handed down from the judges in terms of this, because there should be a sentence that is so deterrent, that sends out a really tough signal. But also, I think that there's an onus on the Prime Minister and the government to start looking at legislation such as bans on homeschooling for children who are on the at-risk register, such as, other aspects that could potentially save these children. And is it a resource? And I have a friend who's a social worker, and I know that, their job is really, really tough, and they don't leave it at home, at work. They do take it home with them at night, and worry constantly about some children who are in their care. But in this case, it just seems that every single adult that this child came in contact with failed her.
Well, my big theory in all of this sort of stuff is that no one's in charge. What's in charge instead is a process. Now, I understand that. You know, we used to have matrons in charge of hospital wards. We had police inspectors in charge, and we had bank managers. And what happened was we had corruption, for example, in the police service in the past. And so rather than allowing police service to be in charge, they put a bureaucratic process in to govern the procedure.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think what has happened in all sorts of walks of life is that the process has got much more power now than individual officers, whether in banks or in social services or police. And somehow the balance that we used to have, where we trusted professionals, needs to be restored to some extent. And when they fail, we throw the book at them. But at the moment, not having anyone in charge of a decision like, this girl is clearly at risk, this boy is clearly at risk, we're going to do something. That seems to me the big change we need to make.
There's no single person where the buck
does that make
stops.
sense? Yeah.
I do also think that there's scope for judgments that are made in the family court, controversial judgments, should be published, albeit you can anonymise the people who are involved, but making that family court process a little more open and transparent, because right now there's decisions made behind closed doors and there's no real scrutiny of that. And I think if there was more scrutiny of it, the family courts might be slightly more accountable than they are at present.
Yeah, that is an interesting theory. Well, the Express also looking at the story, and Sir Keir Starmer raising the point that questions must be answered. As you say, Tim, this is what we hear time and time again. But do we think that something has changed this time? Something has shifted?
Not really, to be honest. You know, because we've been here before, haven't we? And my worry is we'll have another inquiry. And we all know, whether it's the post office or COVID or what have you, these inquiries take forever. And justice delayed is justice denied. And so I honestly think it is more a problem in how we manage our whole society at the moment. There was that little boy who died in, I think it was at Rochdale a year or so ago. He was in a really damp home.
Oh, with the mould?
Yeah, the mould. And again, it was another example, really, where the housing authority, the teachers, the police, everyone was involved, but no one took responsibility. I honestly think it is something of the kind that I just described, that in every key circumstance, someone has to be in charge. And until you are personally responsible, someone at the top of, whether it's social services or the local authority or the police is responsible, I think we'll continue to have stories like this where it's sort of endlessly, where there's a warning sign there and we'll pass it on and we'll keep an eye on it. But no one is actually taking responsibility for these issues.
Alison, do you think that the Prime Minister's intervention will make a difference?
I think that that the Prime Minister had no other choice but to come out and say, because the public outrage of this case, you know, at this point in time, I think the government realise that they're going to have to come out and say something and look to be proactive. But I mean, the Express is also saying that in the past year there have been 485 children in England who have either died or were seriously harmed by abuse. I mean, that is an astronomical figure, and we say that, you know, we don't see the good work social workers do. You know, we don't get to highlight, and as I said, family courts are closed. We don't get to see all the successes, but that is an awful lot of failures. And, you know, as I get on the plane to come here today, they're currently digging a garden up in Ireland trying to find a little boy who was missing for 2 years and no one even reported him missing, a child who was on the at-risk register. You know, children who are deemed to be really vulnerable, who are just falling through the net, and it's completely unacceptable. Someone should be responsible for tracking those children and making sure that they are visited at least once a month to ensure that they're safe.
The problem, you know, that COVID, the scale of family breakdown we have in this country, you know, services are being overwhelmed. You could say that they're not being resourced properly, but the demand on them as well.
No, and abusers are very, very cunning. Abusers will cover their tracks in any way that they can, and, you know, social workers should be aware of that and know not to accept those excuses.
I'm sure they are.
Yeah,
aware.
but I mean, there's cases that we did here
issue.
during lockdown where people were saying, you know, that a child had chocolate put on his face to cover bruises. I mean, things like that I don't think are, you know, someone should have stepped in.
We've just got time to do a little politics, starting with the eye. And this is Mark Rutte saying that NATO needs to be on a war footing, and the suggestion that the contribution of NATO members to the defence budget should increase to potentially 3%, I think was the figure banded around. But Mark Rutte wouldn't confirm or deny that was the figure that they were looking at. Tim?
Well, this is one of the benefits. I'm going to be controversial now. My first controversial comment of the evening, or maybe not.
Nothing less from you.
This is, I think, one of the benefits of Donald Trump's election, because I think Western Europe, in particular, has not properly funded its defence since the post-war period. We have relied on American security. And you can blame Trump in the light. You can say, well, we can't rely on him anymore, whether it's the war in Ukraine or whatever. And we can moan about Trump, or we can say, actually, we are a rich enough continent to defend ourselves. And so the sooner we get up to this level of 3%, then the sooner we can stop worrying so much about who's elected in the US and actually protect our own backyard. And so I think, unfortunately, while we had a more perhaps reasonable person in the White House, someone like Biden or whatever, perceived as reasonable, we could say, well, America will always be the cavalry that will come over the hill and rescue us. Well, I'm not sure we can say that anymore. So we get to 3% as quickly as possible because we live in a dangerous world and it's not fair. Why should American taxpayers protect Europe? We should do it ourselves.
Alison, do you see it as a positive in so much as it has focused NATO's mind, the fact that President-elect Trump will be in the White House come the new year?
No, I mean, what is happening here is the more you spend on defence, the more bombs people make and drop. I mean, the fact is that you're creating a problem to fix it through money. The amount of money that those arms companies make on the back of this, it is no, it's not. I mean, the fact is that you have people creating who could stop those wars, who could use diplomacy to stop them, and instead they're going in and dragging them out for as long as they can, because half the time they're the people awarding the defence contracts to those defence companies. And no, we'll do, instead of trying to stop the war, let's just spend more money on more arms, more weapons, more bombs, and sure, that'll fix the problem. You can't bomb your way.
You sound like a complete surrender monkey.
You can't bomb your way.
You can't deal with Putin by just... He only will respect strength.
Ukraine has shown us you cannot bomb your way out of this situation. We were told that Ukraine war would last 2 weeks, and here we are. We're still looking at the time they're going, this will be over in a flash. This war will be over. You know, the whole US is back in Ukraine, and it's still ongoing, and there's no sign of an end to it. And what are we going to do? Just throw more money at it and hope that helps.
Well, you live
more bombs. That'll fix it.
You live in Northern Ireland, which is far away from Russia. If I was in Poland or in one of the Baltic states, the idea that I would be next to Russia without an army would frighten the life out of me. The only language Putin respects is strength.
They have an army, and they're currently 2% or 2.5%. To keep on, you could increase it to 15%, and it still wouldn't be enough to end that war, because the fact is you can't just bomb your way out of it.
But what do you suggest, Alison, though, that they opt out? You know, if the debate is whether you increase spending, your argument can't be, well, we don't think we should be spending
Wave flowers.
No, well, you use diplomacy. That's what diplomats are for. You use diplomacy and you use negotiation. And the fact is that nobody wants a never-ending war. Neither side want a war that's going to last for 10, 20 years. And eventually there will have to be a negotiation. All wars end in negotiation. None of them ever really end in surrender. You don't see anyone bombing their way to a surrender.
They don't necessarily start with negotiation. They start when one side has superiority over the others militarily. Honestly, I can't believe you were recommending.
But neither side does. And the fact is that we have through millions and millions of the Ukraine war, and it isn't showing any sign of ending. And for NATO just to say, let's increase spending on defence, and sure, that will fix all our problems. You just come back to, you know, the nuclear war, the Cold War. Basically, let's see who has the biggest bombs, and that will solve the problem.
This is a much more existential argument than we have time for right now, I can tell. But thank you very much for the moment, Alison and Tim. We'll be right back. We can take a break. Coming up, how have the two main party leaders managed to make sandwiches into a bread and butter issue? We'll discuss that next. Not sure for how long, though. Do stay with us.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you.
Does your government owe them an apology? The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran?
No.
Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News. I want to be treated equally like everyone else.
It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
We're diminished by claims that you're a racist.
Question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
Today in Manchester, there is nothing quite like it. Blue and red lock horns. Sports most compelling soap opera.
The Manchester Derby on USA.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back. You are still watching the press preview. Still with me, Tim Montgomery and Alison Morris. Let's take a look at this story on the front page of The Guardian, and that is that some jury trials may be axed. This is in order to ease the court backlog. The courts have a tremendous backlog, which means the machines are grinding extremely slowly. Tim?
Well, Alison is the expert on this, so I'm probably going to repeat Alison's words.
Pass it on to me.
Basically,
Yes.
should I say what you told me and you can tell whether I'm right? No, you go.
I do come from, I come from Northern Ireland, where we have non-jury trials, but they're specifically for terrorist-related offences, because that dates back to the Troubles, when juries might have been intimidated or threatened. That doesn't necessarily mean they run quicker, but what this is the plan to take cases that are maybe too serious for the magistrates, but not serious enough necessarily for the Crown, things that fall in between, and rather than let them clog up the system, have them in front of a jury with a magistrate sitting alongside. The idea being that that'll speed things up and speed up justice to get rid of the backlog in the courts. Now, as we know, the cornerstone of the justice system is that you are tried by a jury of your peers, and some people might be against having a judge only. But in some cases, it can actually be beneficial. I mean, juries are run on emotion, whereas judges run on facts, and it can actually speed the case up very quickly. We've seen that. I will say, though, one of the most recent trials that I covered in Northern Ireland with a non-jury, the old Diplock-style courts, lasted 10 years. So I wouldn't necessarily say having no judge speeds things up.
That's an exception. Quite possibly.
It was a terror trial that lasted 10 years, and you will be surprised that at the end of that 10 years, all the defendants were found not guilty.
Oh.
That was what I was going to say.
Let's quickly move on to the story of the day, much lighter, but...
oh, yeah, I can do with sandwiches.
As furiously divisive. Lunches, sandwiches, Badenoch and Sir Keir Starmer. You've got about 20 seconds.
Well, I'm going to hold my tummy in at this point, but I do like lunch. And I'm one of these old-fashioned journalists who'll still drink at lunchtime as well.
I think we better stop there. Tim and Alison, thank you so much for taking us through the papers. We'll see you in the 11 o'clock hour. Let's take a look at the weather for you now. Well, tomorrow looks fairly settled again, if chilly and cloudy for many, but the weekend will bring some changes. Cloud will be quite extensive to start to the day, bringing fog to the hills and drizzly outbreaks to parts of Britain. Most places will be frost-free, but clearer spells in the north and west will bring freezing conditions to a few. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, serious questions are being asked tonight about the child protection and safeguarding systems within the UK, following the details of the Sarah Sharif case.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.